show with me, Chris Goodrum, as per usual. A big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Seems like there's quite a lot of love out there for Moray, and yes, I think they're sort of like the changes they've made have certainly been beneficial. Although, interestingly enough, I know it was expected that one viewer did leave a comment saying that they preferred it when it was a bit more dirtier. That comment sort of disappeared. Don't know why, but you know, it's each to his own. I mean, I know there are a lot of whiskey drinkers that like it a little bit down and dirty. I mean, people like Glenrothes, for example, and Farkless, and etc., etc., and Tullibardine, and Deanston. People love Deanston. So there's a whiskey out there for everyone. So it's cool. Personally, it's not my cup of tea, but you know that. So anyway, we will move on to today's episode of the show, and I got a lovely email from a chap called Richard Locke about a month ago now, I guess, and he is the owner and distiller and chief bottle washer for Retribution Distilling in Frome in Somerset, and sent me this lovely email and asked if I would be interested in you know, tasting some of the samples that he was doing and doing an episode of the show and all that kind of stuff, and I said yeah, absolutely fine. The distillery hasn't been going for very long at all. He started off making homebrew in, one assumes, in his kitchen in Plymouth, and that then sort of like snowballed from there. He then sort of took a course in distilling and brewing at Heriot Watt in Scotland, and then decided he was going to set up a distillery in his shed. Well, as you do, that's the sort of thing you do. I think it was about just over 3 years ago, and then realised that sort of, you know, distilling in the shed has some limitations. Can't imagine what limitations they are, but yeah, that indeed has limitations, shall we say. So after 6 months of that, moved his production to a farm, like I said, in Frome, and has continued on from there. I believe it's quite the interesting thing is that he's tried to keep everything as kind of local and English as possible, and one of the things that piqued my curiosity was obviously the fact that he was using a number of different sort of barley types, but also the yeast as well, and this does seem to be a very in thing at the moment. I was thinking about that fairly recently. I mean, because obviously you've got things like the West Midlands Distillery, you've got other distilleries like Holyrood in Scotland, where the shift has now gone from, you know, different cask types, how we can make our spirit taste differently by using sort of like, you know, ex-sherry and wine and so on and so forth, and then, you know, the shift moved then to sort of different strains of barley and the how they had an impact upon the characteristics of the final spirit. And now the final piece in the puzzle, I suppose, which everybody's now starting to look at, is yeast, and how it has, you know, quite a marked you know, influence upon the spirit. And when you think about it, well, yeast is a bit of a workhorse thing. It does its kind of job, you know, but it does, there are a lot of different strains, and as you may well recall, that the episode I did on Holyrood with their different yeast strains had an amazing difference on the spirit. So was really looking forward to doing that. So it's like I said, I did kind of ask the question about whether he was, Richard was doing a sort of West Midlands thing and actually physically tailoring the new make to go in specific types of casks, and he's sort of doing that. I think he's more a case of wanting to build up a catalogue or a library of different styles of spirit that he can blend together and make different expressions and that kind of thing. I mean, he's only been doing it now for about, what, just over 3 years. I mean, and so the first releases are out, which I have a sample of, release 1 and 2, I think it is, or is it 2 and 3? I forget. Quick check my notes. I think it's 2 and 3. I don't think I got a sample of number 1, but anyway, so it's a new distillery. Interestingly enough, you know, I just find all this really interesting. Really, this kind of brings out the geek in me, and I really want to taste. As you know, I have a great love of tasting new make spirit, and one of the interesting things is that you can actually buy the new make spirit directly from Richard on their website, and it's not too expensive. In actual fact, I did make a note of how much a 20cl bottle was. 20 quid for a 20cl bottle, so I think that's pretty good value. So anyway, I have half a dozen samples here, all serious ABVs, I should say. So one's butt is brimming. Oh yeah, I know. So I'm just going to introduce the line. Okay, so 3 new make samples to start with. This is what Richard is referring to as his standard new make. It uses Maris Otter barley and distillers and ale yeast. So 63%, so no shrinking violet there. I'm going to probably need to lay down after this one. And if you thought that was potent enough, 65% this one. This is what I've just called his alternate new make. So again, Maris Otter barley, but this time a different strain of yeast. It's called Weiss or Weiss. Sounds Germanic to me. So we shall see what that is like. Then we're going to move on to the Peated new make. Again, 65%, although strangely enough, it's not 100% peated new make. It is a blend of 50% peated new make and 50% distilling make, which I'm assuming is the earlier new make. So again, it's made with sort of barley that's been malted in along with English peat from Somerset. So again, this is another thing about sort of wanting to keep as much as local as possible. I must admit, I didn't realise that they had peat bogs in Somerset, but apparently they do. So I think that will be quite interesting. And then we're going to move on to the finished product, insofar as it's finished and bottled, at 3 years and 4 months old. This was release number PR002. So again, all single cask releases at the moment. Slightly different in that the barley in this one was Laureate. The yeast was that sort of well-known sort of M1SO4. Yep. Great names for these yeasts, isn't they? But then I suppose, like I said, they're all kind of workhorse kind of things, so they were never given particularly sort of fancy names, I imagine. So this was a single cask, W004, which happened to be an ex-Buffalo Trace quarter cask, and like I said, it was 3 years old and 4 months. PR003 is probably standard, well, not quite standard, but this is Maris Otter with M1SO4. Cask number W006, which was a 250 litre Oloroso Hoggy, and this is 3 years old and 53%. I failed to mention that the batch, the first one, PR002, is actually 53.3%. And then kindly sent me a work in progress. So this hasn't been bottled yet. This is a sample of their peated new make, which has spent 18 months so far in a Tawny port cask. Don't know the cask number. It's 60%. Oh, yeah, this is going to be quite a sort of an alcoholic episode of the show. So anyway, like I said, all samples are going to need a little bit of dilution at some point, so let's kick off with the standard new make. Right, okay, so standard new make, 63%. Let's see what the nose gives on this end, shall we? Quite an alcohol prickle, not a surprise. Quite robust, very barley led. I mean, I was expecting something a little bit more sort of estery and fruity. I mean, given the fact that, you know, this has, maybe this particular batch of new make is not sort of, you know, been kind of earmarked for early release. There's a little bit of fuselness there. There's some savoury notes. There's a little bit of fruity, but it is quite sort of traditional, shall we say, not as kind of sulphured as I was expecting. I mean, the still is kind of quite small. I think that was custom made in England, and it's got a sort of a Charentaise kind of style to it, you know, with the old sort of like, you know, wizard's hat. So I was expecting sort of quite a kind of chunky, sort of fusely kind of new make, and it is quite, like I say, quite chunky, and sort of, dare I say, old fashioned. Okay, let's see what it passes on. Quite savoury, meaty, again, full, chunky, intense, obviously some fusel notes there. Alcohol's really well contained in actual fact, and it's got a nice fruitiness on the aftertaste. I'm getting a bit of Viognier-esque peach, some apple, some pear, that kind of thing, but it is definitely a chunky sort of, you know, made for power rather than speed kind of new make, shall we say. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. It's brought out a sort of slightly damp earth kind of note. It's oilier, less of the fruit. The fruit does seem to have kind of slunk off, and we are sort of firmly in kind of barley territory, very cereally barleyed. Yeah, again, it's a lovely new make, it has to be said, but it's a very traditional sort of style of new make. Let's see what the parts like. More maltier. It's got a real distinctive beery kind of malty flavour now, which obviously is coming from the brewer's yeast, I would imagine, or the ale yeast. Again, quite cereally, quite dense, bit short. Obviously, it's new make. It's not going to be sort of, you know, really long. It's robust. It's going to stand up to quite a bit of hammering from oak, I think. But it'll be interesting to see how that continues to develop. It doesn't, like I said, have that immediate estery kind of fruitiness, but it's certainly an intriguing new make nevertheless. Okay, so let's move on to the alternate new make. So this has been made using Weiss or Weiss yeast, I think. Right, let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Oh, that's really yeasty. Yeasty, sour fruit, cabbage, asparagus, greens, spring greens. I mean, that's totally, utterly different. I mean, and this just goes to show it's the same barley, it's Maris Otter, but it's a different yeast strain, and this is just night and day. It's got a nice kind of citric note. It's got cucumber, and not a great deal of fruit. There's a sort of almost ashiness there as well. It's really quite intriguing, really quite complex. And I think I would love to see this just in American oak, an ASB or something like that. Nothing too intense, just sort of like, you know, add a bit of vanilla, maybe take away some of that sort of yeasty, sort of cabbagey kind of note, but really intriguing, really interesting. Let's see what the parts are. Again, quite citric, quite herbal, fresh, a lot fresher than the standard new make. Has a real intensity, and although that's 65%, the alcohol is amazingly well contained. I mean, obviously you can taste it. I mean, that's a bit of a given, but it's not like it's kind of searing the mouth. Really nicely contained. Again, it's got that sort of quite intense, cereally, almost kind of shredded wheaty kind of cereally kind of note on the finish. Again, really interesting new make. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does. Doesn't really make much difference at all in actual fact. It's still got a very similar kind of herbal, yeasty, sour fruit kind of character. See what the power's like. a little bit more malty. Again, there's a sort of ale-y kind of brown ale kind of note right on the aftertaste. Less cabbagey, less herbal, softer, possibly a little less complex, but fuller. And yeah, I think that's again really, really intriguing new make. Okay, so let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Right, okay, so there's a greenness there again, so I think this certainly has more in common with the alternate new make, which I imagine this is when he said sort of distilling make, he must have meant this alternative rather than the standard, because it's certainly got that herbally kind of slightly cabbagey kind of character. There's a little bit of loam, some sweet peat. It's very subtle on the peat. Heather, moss, touch of pear drops, a bit of barley. I mean, that's a lovely new make. It's kind of taken the edge off the sort of alternate new make and given that little bit of sweet peat, and it's got a nice sweetness of barley as well. Yeah, like that. Let's see what that's like. That's got a really ashy finish and a real ashy tobacco smoke, peat smoke. But again, it's got that kind of herbal, alternate new make character. Oh, got a little bit of sweet barley there. Wow, I mean that really has got a long finish for a new make. I'm really impressed with that. You can taste the alcohol. The alcohol is kind of like really making my palate tingle. It's really interesting. The sort of like the greenness of the spirit, that kind of sort of slight green fruit, garden greens, cabbage, has kind of given the peat a bit of a green edge to it as well. But wow, I mean that is really very, very impressive, it has to be said. Let's put a little drop of water and see what that does to it. It's toned down a bit of that sort of greenness, and it's now more peat and barley. Yeah, I mean that works really quite nicely. It's just, like I said, taken the edge off all of that sort of greenness. It's a little bit more fusel now. It's brought out some of the sort of fusely notes. But again, really intriguing new make. Let's see what that's like. More barley, less peat. Again, a little bit green, but not as much as when it wasn't sort of diluted. A little bit simpler. Does kind of go missing a little bit in the mid palate, but kind of comes back quite nicely with the peat coming through on the end. Yeah, I mean I still think that's really intriguing new make, and it's maybe a little bit awkward at the moment, possibly, but again it is new make, and I'd be intrigued to see how that kind of works in with sort of like American oak, certainly with a barrel. But again, none of these new makes are basically saying I'm a young bottling, you know, that they're all very traditional. I think they're going to need a number of years in the cask, so you know, we'll see when we get to the actual finished product. So but new make wise, another really intriguing new make. Okay, so let's move on to the batch PR002. So 3 years and 4 months, ex-Buffalo Trace quart cask. Ooh, that's got a lot of oak. Big, sweet, toasty, corny, fat American oak. Vanilla, toffee. Yeah, I mean it's kind of that's the problem. Quart casks, a lot of oak character, and certainly I'm not getting a huge amount of actual spirit character. There's a little bit of apricot possibly, there's some menthol, a little bit of barley possibly, but this is really all about the oak. I mean, it's very clean, and it's, you know, sexy oak, it has to be said. It's got that lovely sweetness to it, and that vanilla and toffee, but again, it's just sort of like too oak dominated for my personal taste, it has to be said. Let's see what passes on. That's oaky, and very drying, and quite tannic. It doesn't really have much length at all. It's kind of the alcohol and the oak are kind of, you know, really putting the clamps on that. Vanilla again, a little bit of tartness there as well. It's just oak at the end of the day, and it kind of backs up my theory that even though this is a different barley type and different yeast type, it's still been made in a kind of a long-term aging kind of style. I mean, if you're going to sort of put something out at sort of like 3 years, then you want to kind of like tweak your fermentation so you have a sweeter and estier, is that really what? You know what I'm talking about. It's just not, it's kind of quarter cask just for the intensity of oak character, and it's kind of, I suppose, to you know, it's a bit like a sort of a component. I mean, if you'd have blended this back in maybe with something that had been matured in sort of, you know, a barrel or something like that, or even a hoggy possibly, you know, it would have just tamed some of that oak character. Let's see what a little bit of the water does. That's even more oak, if it really needed it, to be honest with it. I mean, it is big, oaky, intense. Now, you know, I mean, it's just one of those things, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. Like I said, John's not been doing this for sort of very long at all, and it's a learning curve. And, you know, this is just too heavy on the oak, and I'm getting no spirit character whatsoever, which is a real pity when you think about, you know, all the time and effort that's gone into sort of like, you know, making the new make, and I just can't smell any of it. It's just oak. Let's sort of pass on. Very toffeed. Again, it's a bit on the short side. It is oaked again, and yeah, I don't want to labour the point because I love what he's doing with the new make, but I think this is just, that was just too much oak. I mean, that was, get something out, and there's obviously going to be a commercial necessity to get something out to market. And I know he's doing sort of vodka and sort of rum and stuff like that, which you can probably get out to market because you can white spirits. I think it should have, yeah, it's interesting, but I just think too much oak. Okay, so let's move on to batch PR003, 250 litre. Oloroso, Hoggy, Marisotta and M1S04. Let's see, is the yeast, let's see what those good. Again, quite oak dominated. I'm getting a lot of chunky, sweet, raisinated fruits. It's got a little bit of a savoury meatiness to it. But again, we're very much oak dominated. There's a little bit of barley, some menthol, some pepper, some sweet vanilla. I mean, it's a slightly better balance than batch number 2, and it has to be said that the spirit kind of is quite happy with that oak, and it may be just it needed more time just to let some of the oak just dissipate off, or vat it back into an American oak cask or something like that. It's kind of again, it feels like a bit of a component, I suppose, and this is where I think maybe they could have gone with doing some kind of vatting as a sort of you know, do the single cask bottling, but kind of create some kind of vatting, you know, a bit like Lindors, you know, you had the sort of standard bottling, and then they did the single cask releases, do a sort of signature. Maybe it's too soon for that, I don't know. Anyway, again, lots of oak, but a little bit better balance. Let's see what pass on. Again, raisinated fruit, ginger, a little bit of herbal sort of Oloroso. I'm guessing an American oak seasoned Oloroso cask, quite a lot of vanilla, a little bit of toffee. Again, I'm not getting a lot of spirit character. There's a bit of barley coming through there. There's a little bit of citrus. Again, I think it's got a slightly better balance than sort of like batch number 2. But again, I think it's kind of, like I say, it feels like a little bit of a component. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. Okay, so now I'm getting a little bit more herbal spirit character, less of the sherry. It's got a nice sweetness to it, a sweetness of barley, and that kind of, you know, works. Now once I've tamed it down a little bit, a little bit of a meatiness there, possibly slight savoury character. Let's put that on. Okay, so the balance is a little bit better. It's bringing out a little bit more barley character, but it's still quite heavy on the Oloroso. Now, although I think it's better balanced, the problem is the retail price of this. And I did mention it to Richard, and he basically said, well, you know, costs and all that kind of stuff. 77 is a little bit heavy for that, you know, and I can see exactly what you're going to say, and yeah, I can see the comments coming already. How much for a 3-year-old English spirit? And if it was cheaper, if it was in the 50 quidish kind of mark, I would be saying, yeah, definitely. But you know, they're small scale, and it's, you know, costs a lot of money to make this kind of stuff, and you know, I mean, I can't argue with that. I mean, Richard's obviously sold some of, you know, some bottles of this at this kind of price, but for me, just a little bit too expensive, not quite enough complexity, intriguing though it is, but you know, it has its limitations, I think. So, and this is, I have mentioned that to Richard as well, so this is not coming as some kind of surprise, and he's going to go, what the fuck are you talking about? Just my personal opinion. Okay, so let's move on to the work in progress Tawny cask. Look at the colour of that. I mean, yeah, it's a lovely colour, but I mean, you know, that looks like Tawny port. So bit of a kind of giveaway there, isn't it? Anyway, let's see what the nose is like. Porty and peated. I mean, what's not like to like about that? It's almost like peat and sherry. They kind of go hand in hand, don't they? I mean, and it's a sweet sort of red-black fruits and peat and oxidised fruit and menthol. There's a little bit of raw spirit there. I mean, it is only 18 months old, and it has got that new make rawness there. It's got some meatiness. I think it might well be the alternate new make again. No, it's not. It's not got the herbalness. I think it might be the standard new make. Or the sort of the peated new make, you know, the sort of like 50%. I think this is, it doesn't quite have the sort of like, it doesn't quite have the herbalness, so maybe it is a different peated new make. I don't know. I mean, this is the confusing thing about it, and I suppose that's another issue, isn't it? That when you're doing all these different new makes, it suddenly becomes a little bit, is it disconnected? There isn't a sort of a continuity, which, you know, when you have a distillery that uses the same barley, the same yeasts and all that kind of stuff, there's a continuity of style throughout the entire range. Here we have a lot of different stuff going on. Is that a good thing? I don't know. You tell me whether you think that's a good thing, but it does mean that there's no kind of signature for the distillery, because it's also different. Is that a good thing? I don't know. I'm again, you know, asking the question, playing a bit of devil's advocate. Anyway, so this is very raw. It's in its infancy. It's 18 months old, but very clean, and I have to say that, no blemishes, no sulphur other than the obvious sulphur notes from the new make. Anyway, let's sort of pass on. Even that's only 60%, right? Only 60%, you say, well, somebody else, almost 63. It feels a lot masked, a lot shorter, drier, more, it's plenty of tawny fruit, that kind of thing. Again, work in progress, not a great deal of barley, not a great deal of distillery character, or spirit character, I should say, because there is, again, we're talking about, we don't really know what the kind of signature spirit distillery character that Retribution have. Put a little drop of water. I mean, it's very chewy, lots and lots of sort of port character. Again, would work really nicely, I think, in a blend, or just give them a few more years, I think. Ooh, that's really manurey now, really kind of animally. I'm almost kind of getting that kind of like sort of Grenache, Mourvedre kind of animally kind of character. A little bit more sort of sulphur notes, very earthy, very no, it's not dirty, that's wrong. I was going to say dirty, but dirty in a clean way. If you know, in that kind of Mourvedre kind of animally kind of, you know, cow poop kind of sort of dirtiness, but not so dirty if you kind of follow my logic. I'm rambling now. I've had far too much alcohol. Anyway, let's see what does. That's really animally and manurey and farmyardy and oxidised fruit, and it, like I said, it tastes more like sort of like Mourvedre in actual fact than sort of port. Again, it's kind of interesting. It's sort of, you know, it's nowhere near ready for bottling yet. Well, I mean, unless you kind of like have a fetish for this kind of stuff, which some of you probably do. Interesting, shall we say. Okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to Richard from Retribution Distilling for the samples for today's episode of the show. Really interesting. I mean, you know, like I said, loved the new make. The standard new make had that sort of robust, natural, in it for the long term kind of character. It was not a sort of an immediate estery, fruity kind of style of new make, and I'm not saying that's where the problem lies, but you know, that's new make is just going to need a lot more time in the cask, as is the alternate new make, and even more so to get rid of that kind of cabbagey kind of sort of sulphury kind of character. But once it does, it'll be a bit like a Dalwhinnie. It'll become sort of like quite meaty and intense and sort of like, you know, but that's just going to take a lot of time. It is not a kind of rush job sort of new make, it has to be said. The peated new make was really good. Really enjoyed that. And I suppose doing it 50-50, I would like to have seen 100% peated new make to kind of judge what that's like, but unfortunately I wasn't sent that, and that's kind of, you know, that's what the distillery are doing. Batch PR002, just 2 oaked. I mean, you know, an American oak quarter cask at 3 years of age, you're not going to get any distillery character, you're not going to get spirit character whatsoever. And it was just too oaky, and to a certain extent, batch number 2, a little better balance, but then it's a slightly larger cask, so I'm actually getting a little bit of spirit character, but again, lots and lots of sherry character, lots of Oloroso-y dried fruit, and you know, a little bit expensive for what it actually is, but you know, that's the price that it has to be, you know. So you know, if that's what you want to do, if you want to buy it, that's the price you're going to have to pay. And lovely to see a sort of work in progress bottling. Very few distilleries will ever send you anything that's work in progress and new make, it has to be said. Really intriguing, love to see where that's going to be. And I think sort of like, you know, summing it all up, love to see, I love this kind of stuff. I love the geekiness of it. It really appeals to me, but this stuff is just going to take a lot more time. And I would like to see some kind of signature bottling, some kind of release that basically said, this is what Retribution is all about. Yeah, we're going to do these wonderful, interesting single cask bottlings, different new makes and all that kind of stuff. But a signature release, I really think is a kind of key kind of bottling, just so basically people can go, ah, that's what your distillery is all about. But anyway, just a few thoughts. You know, feel free to sort of like, you know, agree and disagree and say I'm talking crap. That's fine by me. Anyway, all I can say is keep an eye on the distillery. I think time is what is needed here. Time is of the essence, as we say. So, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. I've certainly enjoyed it, and like I said, I'm going to have to go and have a lie down now. Almost 60% odd spirit. I mean, my liver is probably going to thank me for this. But anyway, until next week, good dramming and good afternoon. Women's eyes, they're cold like